Out of order.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the House Committee on Government Operations and Military Affairs. We are here this morning to take a look at some language related to dispatch in the budget as it came over to us from the Senate. The budget bill is H494, and I am glad to have Senator Ruth Hardy here today. So thanks for being with us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Representative McCarthy. It's nice to see you all on this really busy week. It seems like you have enough trail mix for the week.
It's a little of that.
Wow, and chocolate covered pretzels.
Chocolate mix.
You guys really know how to party.
The first time I went to House Ways and Means, Michael was chair, I walked in and there was nothing except a big bottle of ibuprofen and antacids.
That's great.
That's kind of where we're at over the other side. Okay, emergency communicate or public safety communication system is the term that we settled on, which is informally known as dispatch. And as you all know, the Senate Committee on Government Operations was sort of tasked with trying to come up with a bill that would move along work on a statewide public safety communications system, or dispatch, dispatch is, you all know this probably, but just for the listening, the audience at home, if you call 911 in an emergency, you talk to a 911 operator, and then they call a dispatcher, and a dispatcher dispatches an ambulance, law enforcement, fire. It is clearly something we all need. The question was asked of us repeatedly in the House, Senate Government Operations Committee of, is this an essential state government function? And we answered, yes, it is, because we need everybody in the state to be able to get the first responders they need when they call 911. So this has been a problem for the past 53 years. Plus, probably the first statewide study dispatch came out in the spring of 1970. And there have been over 20 studies that are related to it since then. So it's a tough nut to crack, but we did our very best and came up with a full bill and S-139, I believe, and sent it to finance, and it sort of got a little stuck in finance. So what we're trying to do is move forward with some of the work that's necessary to ensure that we can eventually move to a statewide dispatch system. And what that means is statewide oversight, not necessarily statewide sort of operation. So there would still be local or regional dispatch centers, and that would be doing the actual dispatching, but there would be state standards, state communications, state fallback, all of the sort of making sure that we are all on the same page, on the same technology, and on the same system, so that we all had equitable service and service that we all paid for equitably as well. Because right now, there are some towns that get their dispatching service through the state and don't directly pay for it. And then there are some towns that get their dispatching service through a regional or local dispatch center. There are some entities that dispatch themselves. There are some that get dispatched from out of state. It's kind of all over the map. And I should have brought with me the map. We have an interactive map that I can send you that shows you how complicated dispatch is in the state that Senator Watson made. So you can click on your town and see who dispatches for your town. It's pretty cool. I don't know if you want me to take.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Stuck in finance because of money issues appropriately or turf issues inappropriately?
I think you should ask finance that. But there was money in the bill. One of the things that there was an off session sort of task force that was looking at dispatch that we, the General Assembly, I think put in last year's budget.
We've
Yes, so-
testimony on the working.
Okay, so yeah.
Committee's familiar with you.
Okay, so one of the things they said was we need to come up with a funding source. So the bill did include a funding source. And I think that was part of what held finance up, but there were other things as well. But this language just moves along the data collection, the analysis, and the sort of planning that's necessary to hopefully move forward with a statewide system. In our bill, we tasked the E911 board with sort of overseeing dispatch statewide, which is what they do for E911, obviously. They've done a fantastic job. We got excellent testimony from them. I know you have Barb Neal on the Zoom with us today, and she was incredibly helpful. We also heard from public safety, but the Commissioner of Public Safety, they are less excited about doing that. So we thought that it would be great to task E911 with it. So this language in the budget tasks E911 with doing the data collection, analysis, and planning. It also provides them with $2 million of the 11 million in general fund that we appropriated last year in order to hire consultants. So it wouldn't be Barb doing this by herself or her staff doing it by themselves. It would not be the board itself doing it. It would be them hiring and overseeing the work of contracted consultants who are experts in the technology and in project management, in financing, et cetera. So that's what the language is in the budget.
So Senator Hardy had, as the bill kind of, went to finance and then kind of that piece of S139 was put into the budget, was there a conversation about the timing of when the information would come back relative to the kind of federal money that's available to help build out? Because part of the reason we fenced that general fund money was to also match I think there's $9.8 million in federal.
Yeah, there's $9 million in a federal earmark that came through Senator Leahy's office. That came to, or it's supposed to come to the Department of Public Safety. That money has gotten complicated by the route through which it's come from the federal government. So it has come through a route that has made it so it can't be subgranted, and it needs to be used for specific purposes that didn't quite align with the way that the state wanted to use it. So Department of Public Safety is working with our federal delegation and working with the federal agencies to try to sort of get a little bit more flexibility with that funding. And the Commissioner of Public Safety is the one you should talk to if you want more details about that. So that money is sort of in flux right now. And it was complicated because it came from Leahy's office, and Leahy's not in office anymore. So they've been trying to work with the other offices and everybody getting up to speed on that. So the federal money at this point is not part of this plan. That the 2 million is general fund. But hopefully we'll get that federal money straightened out. They asked for an extension so that they could change their budget plan. And then that will be available hopefully for dispatch as well. So yeah, I don't know if they answered your question, but.
No, I think we need to, I think one of the things that we should try to consider is if we need to do anything to anticipate trying to get the information that we need that's envisioned in this language in time to be able to get money out the door so that we can take advantage of those federal funds if we need to stand up that infrastructure by the end of 2024, which I think was the original.
Yeah.
Seems like we're going to get an extension from what I'm hearing from different voices, but it seems like it's also a little unclear.
I mean, I think that there was a lot of concern about doling out grants to local communities for dispatch without having statewide standards, and making sure that, we weren't just handing out grants for a system that was going to be antiquated, or that wasn't going to be connected with other systems, or that wasn't going to have the same kind of technology or fail over and integration that we need. So part of what this language does is just start doing that work, so that when we do have the federal money and can grant it out to local communities, that we know that they're, meeting the standards that we have for dispatch with the state. Because right now it's kind of all over the map. So and this would require a report back in January of 2024. The dispatch bill S-139 was recommitted to the Senate Government Operations Committee. So if we get this information in January of 24, we're hoping we can take what we learned from that, at least preliminary information, rework it into the bill. It, might change some of the things that we thought worked this year, and move that bill forward next year so that you all can get it and have a crack at it as well. So I think this information is really crucial, and we didn't want to start over, and we did not want to do another study committee, or, we wanted, somebody like Barb and her team working on it so that it was moving it forward and not just kicking the can down the road for another decade again.
What's the number of that bill?
Senator Sutton, that goes against my understanding last year about $11 million basically being available. I know even, Newport Dispatch, who was, trying to combine some of my towns up there to go through the Newport Dispatch, was possibly looking at some of that money. So now you're saying that $9 million of it can't even be used yet? I mean, that's.
The 9 million is the federal money, and then the 11 million is general fund money. So the 2 million that's in the budget for this is from the general fund money. I think there's a reluctance to dole out money or grant out money to locals without having a sort of broader state plan.
So there's an additional $11 million there somewhere.
It's general fund money that's being held in reserve right now. Yeah.
Yeah, just to totally clear this up. So there's $11 million that was fenced off last year.
Yeah.
We're talking about $2 million of it being used to really do the inventory work, understand where the gaps are in dispatch, understand how much money we're spending from state, local, regional dollars on dispatch.
Yeah.
So it'd still be $9 million in general fund that could be available for improving the dispatch infrastructure. And then there's the $9 million in federal as well. So it was about 20 million total.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. And nobody wants to waste the money. So we want to make sure that the system is planned out before we spend a lot of that money.
Well, I guess, I think I'm looking at all the information here, and I'm sure that we've already done some of this over the years. And $2 million, we're just eating up that money left and right, and we aren't even putting it to good use at this point. So
none of it's been spent yet. So this information is not available on a collected statewide basis. Some of it is available, but it's very, it's not cohesively collected. So, over the next 6 months, hopefully we can get more information on what's out there. Just looking at the financing of it, for example, some of the pushback we got from towns, as we were trying to create a new way of financing, was they weren't, they were like, how much is this going to cost? You're going to make us pay for it, but nobody knows how much it's going to cost. So, fair, that's a fair concern. And so one of the things over the next 6 months is to hopefully collect information about how much is statewide being spent on dispatch. So how much would a statewide system cost? And so that we can better figure out a financing model for it.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Cooper.
Okay. So is this why in my recollection, Chittenden County did a lot of work on getting, and then Colchester got a little squirrely, maybe Shelburne. But a lot of work was put into it, and I understood some money was actually allocated, and then because of this particular coordination issue, it was pulled back, or?
Yeah, so in the off session, there were, the Department of Public Safety was going to issue grants to a number of towns. That was one of them. Maybe Newport was one. I don't remember. And it became pretty clear that there wasn't, I think there were a lot of concerns that if we granted out to some of these entities, like, for example, one of them was the Orange County Sheriff's Office, which kind of imploded after they were, told they were going to get a grant. So there was concern about the consistency, stability, and technological feasibility statewide, not necessarily with individual ones. So it's entirely possible that, this research will show that next January, February, whatever, that, okay, this grant should, is fine to go forward. But I think there was a concern about having statewide planning first. That was certainly what we focused on, was that we want to make sure that we have a consistent system across the state before we start funding little projects all over the place. So I'm sure that there are towns that aren't happy about that, but.
Would you say that if we were to if there was no dispatch today and we were to try to build a system that was interoperable, had good technology, there was failover from, so that if one site went down, the next one would pick it up seamlessly, we'd probably be spending hundreds of millions of dollars on that kind of a system. So what we're talking about is being really jealous about this 20 million because we want to make sure we invest it to fill the right gaps.
Yeah.
And that it's working toward a future where we incrementally get to a place where there are statewide standards, there is governance. Because right now it's St. Albans is doing its thing. There's Lamoille is doing its thing.
Yeah.
And then there are all of those towns, which we talked about, that are still relying on the state police to dispatch centers and not participating in the funding of this at all.
Yeah, that's an accurate description. And if you look at the map that I can forward to you guys, there are places in the state where it's working really well. I mean, St. Albans is actually a system that's working really well and has, double failover. They have 2 dispatch centers and a mobile dispatch center. They have really high-tech equipment. They're very organized. They have a bunch of towns. And then you have other parts of the state that they're totally reliant on the state. And the state dispatch centers are understaffed and stressed and really not functioning well. And then there are parts of the state where Representative Byron and I live right now and serve that have really, really shaky dispatch, and they're all relying on each other in a way that is very shaky. So yeah, it's really, really inconsistent across the state. And we want to make sure that it's equitable, both from a service perspective and a financing perspective. Some towns are paying almost nothing and other towns are paying probably too much. And so we need to look at that as well. Yeah.
Okay.
So this isn't the perfect solution, but it's what we were able to get considering the bill got stuck.
All right. Other questions for Senator Hardy before we talk to our E911 director?
Yeah. And Barb, I know she's there. She has been so helpful and so game to do whatever the state needs. And she is just a gem. And I think there's a lot of people who are, we have one of the best 911 systems in the country. It's an award-winning system. So we're really hoping that we can do the same with dispatch. Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Well, I had a question from Representative Byron that I think is really important. The dispatch language is on pages like 141 and on, but it's like 2 or 3 pages. So it says 143, 408, but it's.
Okay.
I just looked at
I looked at it, I was like, oh my goodness.
Yes, no, it's 4 or 5 select pages. Yeah,
Okay.
It's just a few pages. I think I have the whole thing printed out here and it's.
No, great. I just hadn't looked at it yet and I just.
on our site. Great. So Ms. Neal, thank you. I think you're with us on Zoom. Good to see you, Barb.
I think I'm here too as well. Nice to see you.
Yes,
Can you hear me okay?
we can hear you loud and clear. Thanks for being with us today. And
Okay.
to talk a little bit. So it sounds like reading the language here in section C112 of the big bill as it came over from the Senate that the responsibility of hiring the consultant and doing the data gathering that Senator Hardy was just describing to us is primarily falling on E911. And so we definitely want to hear your take and thoughts on if there are things we need to do to bolster your support here, because that's a lot.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you, Chair McCarthy. I am Barbara Neal, Executive Director of the Enhanced 911 Board. And I want to say I appreciate Senator Hardy's very complimentary comments just a few minutes ago about the conversations we've had along the way. I have done my best to make sure that if this work lands with the 911 Board, that we are set up for success and can move this along. I should start though, or I will start by saying that the full 911 Board has not met to discuss the language in section C112 of H494, though it was distributed to the board members on Monday. So with that, therefore, there's no formal board position on this specific language. I am going to convey to you, though, some feedback that I received just this week from both the board chair and vice chair. So section C112 is very much pared down from the original language in S139, as Senator Hardy was explaining. There are concerns remaining on several aspects of the language. First, there's continued concern about the enormity of this project and the vast scope of work involved. And the concern is specifically that could negatively impact our current 911 mission, which is what we're always very protective of. So our resources are fully occupied with that important work as it is. Additionally, the dispatch problem that the language seeks to resolve, we feel has not clearly been defined. There is recognition of the need for funding and planning in terms of modernizing CAD and related systems, and for the need for improved resiliency and failover in the dispatch world. However, many existing regional dispatch agencies are functioning well as they are, and they are paid for by the communities that they serve. And that, by the way, does include our 4 regional public safety answering points that also answer 911 calls. So the question is, why would we change that, or why would we do work that would suggest that we're going to change that? And additional feedback raised the question also as to whether or not we are the appropriate entity to do this work. So we have been singularly, the 911 Board has been singularly focused on oversight and management of the statewide 911 system for over 25 years. Dispatch has always been a separate and distinct issue from that. So there's a sense, I believe, based on this feedback that I've been getting, that we are being asked to solve a not well-defined problem that we had no hand in creating. So when we have these conversations, that the question comes up often of how did we get here, at least in the conversations that I've been having. There appears to be general agreement, including from the Regional Dispatch Working Group, this topic was discussed, that at least some of this situation began with the 2015 closure of 2 Department of Public Safety dispatch centers in Derby and Rutland. And the situation, problem, whatever name you want to put on it, has continued to churn through attempts to develop and implement an equitable fee structure for the non-state agencies for whom DPS dispatches. And it continues to churn today with the current staffing crisis and the challenges they are facing with that, which has resulted in their stated need to cease the work, to stop dispatching for the non-state entities. So that's kind of what we go back to when we talk about how did we get here. Now, I do want to add that the Department of Public Safety has long partnered with the 911 board for 911 call taking services. We believe they should continue to play a significant, even core role in the dispatch landscape moving forward. And Commissioner Morrison and I have had discussions about the need to continue this work, regardless of what becomes of this language. And we are in agreement that there are likely multiple paths forward. So our conversations are going to continue. In fact, during earlier testimony, and I'm not sure if it was in front of House GovOps or elsewhere, but we proposed, Commissioner Morrison and I proposed that we develop an operational plan and timeline in partnership so that we could bring that back for discussion next session. Now, all of that said, and regardless of what entity is ultimately assigned this responsibility, I believe that there must be adequate time and resources to do the work. The resources need appears to be addressed with this language, with the funds set aside for hiring subject matter experts. The January 2024 deadline for a completed data collection and analysis as described in the language is aggressive, very aggressive, and in my opinion, likely not achievable. The reality is this work will likely not begin much before July by the time the bill becomes effective. So subject matter experts will be essential and will need to be obtained through a competitive bid process, which means no consultant work until at least early fall. And that's probably optimistic in and of itself. So that just really cuts down the time that anyone would be able to lead or direct a consultant through this work. Also, the success of that data collection relies upon cooperation from dispatch agencies around the state and to some extent outside the state. And there have been concerns voiced about the level of cooperation that might be encountered. I don't want to set anything up for like a negative interaction with stakeholders, but if these entities are feeling threatened by this work or that we are somehow on their turf in an environment that has worked well for them for probably decades, we just have concerns about how that might impact the work. So I share those concerns with you, these concerns, even absent an official board position, so that you'll understand the extraordinarily heavy lift that is being presented to us and our concerns about the successful completion of that work. And I'm happy to hand it back to the chair now for questions as you see fit.
So Representative Higley, go ahead and
Yeah, sure.
lay something on the table for everybody to think about.
Yeah, Barb, thank you. I guess the first question I have is, so if the E911 board isn't the entity to do the study, who do you suggest? And second of all, I kind of agree with you in the sense of, I know I mentioned Newport Dispatch and a lot of towns are signing up with them. And I'm a little concerned that it seems like these communities are making a go of it however they need to, and making some real strides in reaching out and getting things done. And I do worry about, after all the work that they've done to make it work, now all of a sudden, there's going to be possibly all these changes. So I kind of agree with you there. But again, can you think of an entity that could possibly do this faster and better than the E911 board?
Well, I think the conversation has popped back and forth all session long and even before between, the Department of Public Safety and the 911 board. So that would be a logical entity in my view. Maybe there are others. I think, they own the infrastructure that makes dispatch run throughout much of Vermont. So that was one key factor, especially early on when we were talking about this in S139, is having, the entity that manages this work would need to have control over those assets. So they do have that control. So that would be logical in my mind. I did mention, and I'll say again, that the Commissioner Morrison and I have had conversations about working together to develop some sort of operational timeline for this work, rather than having it be the, the responsibility of one in particular, perhaps. So I'm not sure, like I said, the board hasn't met to fully discuss this. So I'm not sure what the reaction would be to that, but that has been discussed in the past.
Thank you.
Representative Waters, go ahead.
Thank you. If you think that it is aggressive to have a January 1st or a January 2024 deadline, what do you think would be a reasonable deadline?
I would think at least a year to get the information, which I know is not helpful when you are in session from January to May. So, but I think that it would take more time than that to get this information together.
So, Barbara, I've had a lot of conversations about this. I really wanted our committee to spend weeks really diving into all the details here and giving what happened with S139 and the holdup in the Senate. We're kind of left to rush to some conclusions here. I am hearing your concern about the ability of the E911 board to sort of hold this on its own. And I'm wondering how you would feel about us spending, the next 24 to 48 hours working with our colleagues outside the room on maybe expanding a little bit of the responsibilities here so that it's not on E911. I think we need to hear from Commissioner Morrison, frankly, because with some of the testimony that you just gave, and that there also need to be some voices from some of the other stakeholders that own infrastructure and participate in this and across the state. It seems like some of the information could be available relatively quickly about the standards that we would want communities that are receiving funds to get. And that is the kind of thing we'd love to see by January so that we can make some decisions about finally getting some of that money out the door. That doesn't seem like as big a lift to me, and tell me if I'm understanding this incorrectly, as figuring out what are we spending money on for dispatch across the state in the patchwork that we have today, who's spending that money, whether it's contracting with outside of the state in New York and New Hampshire in some cases, there's all kinds of stuff going on. We want to understand all of that and where all the gaps are in both infrastructure and service. That seems like the bigger, longer thing. So if we stood up a task force that had your voice, that had DPS, maybe some of the other stakeholders to oversee the work of the consultant, and we had support, maybe it's help with JFO with some of the number stuff, something like that. Do you think spreading out that work and having more stakeholders be responsible for operationalizing some of these things over the next year might be better than to say it's all about this study and it's all on E911?
I think that might alleviate some of the concerns that I heard, just this week from board members. And I mean, no, I shouldn't say just this week, because those concerns have kind of been there, throughout the discussion, but really came back to the top, in viewing this language. So yeah, to maybe be more specific about what is needed in January, or early in the session even, and getting those appropriate voices at the table could help alleviate some of those concerns.
So I think it would behoove a small group of us to try to work on this a bit. We'll get some time with Commissioner Morrison so that we can hear her thoughts on the proposal that's here as quickly as we can. And then I think we will need to come back together and look at maybe what do we need to know by January, and what's a longer what's the longer range vision here, and then who needs to be doing this work over the next year and a half. Those are questions that I think we're close to in the Senate language. But it seems like with hearing your concerns, Barb, I want to make sure that we're not doing what we did with the regional dispatch working group, which was to say, go figure all this stuff out. It's impossible. And then, of course, we weren't very satisfied with the product. I don't want to repeat that mistake we made last time again.
Right, absolutely. I agreed. And I would not want to be a part of that, or have that as the end result either. So looking for ways to make this work, whoever's responsible for it, successful. So those sound like good ideas, and I'm happy to speak with you further in those informal conversations or back here in testimony. I think speaking to Commissioner Morrison is a really good idea. She likely will have some very good insight into her ideas for how this might move forward.
Committee, go ahead, Representative Hooper.
It's really amazing and probably stymieing how much of the eastern part of the state is done in New Hampshire.
I'm sorry, some of your question cut out. I heard you say something about the eastern part of the state.
I said it's just amazing the amount of the eastern part of the state that's done through New Hampshire.
Yes, many communities. Yeah, and also there are a few along the southern border that, or at least one, I should say, along the southern border that gets services from Massachusetts, and a few along the western border from New York.
Committee, I would like to set up a little ad hoc group to try to dive in and triage. I think we're running up against the clock with our budget committee of conference, and they've given us the next day or two to try to make a recommendation here. Are there folks that want to dive in on this? I know Representative Chase, you and I have looked at this language a little bit yesterday. Are there other folks, Representative Higley? All right, anybody else dying to be a part of trying to get some language together on this? Representative Hooper, I'm seeing a nod. All right, so we'll try to get Commissioner Morrison. Her schedule's a little bit wild, but we'll see if we can find time when we're not on the floor, when she could be here to get her feedback on some of these broader issues. And then at the same time, the four of us will try to huddle with Ledge Council and see if we can put something on the table tomorrow. Any other questions for Barb before we move on here? Great. Thank you so much for being with us. I'm sure we will be seeing you again.
Sounds like it. Yes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
All right, committee. Well, the dispatch hot potato to be continued. Just, until we get it right, it's just, it'll probably be part of this committee's work for the next decade. Yes.
Good to have downrange goals.
Yeah, well, it seems like though, I mean, the comment I'll make on this is they're starting through the fog to be some consensus around where we want to get to eventually, but it's just how we get there. Representative Marwicki, go ahead.
I agree. I think bigger picture, we're looking at similar situations with police, fire, EMS. And one of the challenges is convincing people that if you want this, we have to pay for it. And everybody in, we're going through this now in our county where there are towns who want the services, who want the sheriff, but they don't want to pay for it. And that equation is a tough one. But I see that's the reality in the future. If you want it, you have to pay for it.
Yeah, and the way that intersects with the governance, where we have some communities where the infrastructure and the staffing is all, done at the municipal level, and some it's done at the sheriff's office, and some it's kind of a hodgepodge of, we're buying dispatch service for fire from New Hampshire, but our law enforcement's dispatched by Westminster or Williston. It's a very, to say this isn't one problem, it's hundreds of problems, trying to get it all so that Vermonters are safe and the calls get dispatched appropriately.
It's a cultural shift too, I think, in some ways, that we're going to have to do consolidated services and we're going to have to pay for it.
Representative Hooper.
But you just mentioned and it brought to mind that personnel is an issue. One of the problems with dispatch 911 and the PSAP centers is there's really competition for getting people to work. So one of the significant areas I think we should consider is maybe reversing that trend, maybe looking at places where people are disadvantaged and could use better employment rather than moving things into an area where there's a lot of competition for jobs, filling jobs.
It seemed to be a pretty big priority from some of our colleagues to make sure that as we stand up dispatch, that at least in some areas of the state, there's a really strong feeling that the folks need to be there. And some of the places where I think there's a desire to get access to money to improve the regional infrastructure or to fill a gap that's really needed in dispatch are places that are relatively economically disadvantaged. So that may be part of what we add into this conversation is about, sort of who's doing the work where. That's a good point. Anybody else on this before we move on to hear our amendment proposal? Okay. All right. Thanks, committee. It's a lot to take in and try to do in the waning days of the session here, but we'll do our best. So moving on to H490, Representative Shaw, do you want to take the chair and we'll take a look at your amendment?
Never a dull moment.
We got a lot of bills moving right now.
We are so much.
I don't need one pot.
But I won't. You don't have a brilliant idea for us to solve the entire dispatch problem.
It might take a whole lot more money than we're dealing.
Yeah.
But, so probably get started.
Yeah, please. Introduce yourself and tell us about your amendment.
Representative Shaw from Pittsburgh. I'm here today to speak to H490, which is the charter change for Linden and Linden's bill. And I just have a minor amendment, and I appreciate you giving me the time to speak to it. Just a little bit of history. Last year, the Transportation Committee did a copious amount of work on covered bridges. We saw and still see and solve on the bridges by oversized and overweight vehicles. And I became particularly interested when I saw Title 32 in the charter change to make sure that everything that the work that the Transportation Committee had done the previous year was included in this, so that the town of Linden would be strong when they were after folks that had damaged their covered bridges. I don't know how many they had, but they do have one famous one. So I was concerned about that, and I think I expressed that concern yesterday on the floor to Representative Morgan. And so I did talk to Ledge Council, particularly Tucker and Anthea Dexter Cooper, who is our legislative council person for transportation, to come up with a bit of a change in section 14 to make sure that the town has all the tools in the toolbox. This is for me, this would be a strengthening and help Linden recover any costs or pursue people that may have done damage to the bridge. Just for personal information, there's at least 4 other sections in Title 23 now that deal with covered bridges and damage to covered bridges. So I want to make sure the town is aware of that, and there were some processes to go through to sign and let people know what's ahead of them coming into a restricted bridge. So I believe the language, I forwarded that to Andrea, and I believe you have that electronically.
Yep.
Cool. Okay. So changes are basic, I think. Well, I can't say that in this building, but the change in the title, which outlines an increased penalty for violation of the legal limits for covered bridges resulting in damage. And the language, your language basically stays the same all the way to line 10. And because the first few lines, I've been convinced and am convinced that the other sections of Title 23 have been covered through this previous language. But I think we may have missed 23 VSA 1397A, which is weight limits. And it's very critical on covered bridges to make sure that we have a properly posted bridge and for the weight of the bridge. We don't want damage for over height or over width, but we certainly don't want damage for overweight, that could be a fatal for a covered bridge. So I offer this amendment to make sure that we rolled in all the issues that we saw last year for covered bridges. And I guess that's it, Mr. Chair.
So if I understand it correctly, what we're really doing here with your amendment is the same ability for the town of Linden to seek the $10,000 civil penalty or real damages, but it applies only when the bridge is properly posted.
You hit the nail on the head, Mr. Chair. Yes.
All right. Mm-hmm. It tightens it up a little bit, it sounds like. Any questions for Representative Shaw? All right, well, we'll hear from Legislative Council. Thank you very much.
Did you get your pretzels?
No.
Tucker, we had a big day on the floor yesterday.
Yes, you did. Good morning, Tucker Anderson, Legislative Council. Immediately rolled into Senate GovOps to start walking through the bills that had just come up on the House floor. So a little presumptive, but, made for an entertaining afternoon.
It's that time of year.
It is. So Representative Shaw's proposed amendment would strike section 14 as it came out of this committee and was adopted by the body yesterday, and replace it with this section 14, which is, as the representative accurately put it, substantially similar to what you put in your committee amendment. The exceptions are that the title has been changed to be very specific, that this is increased penalties for violation of legal limits resulting in damage. Very specific title to call out that the penalties that exist in general law can still be applied. And then here we have ordinance-specific penalties that are an increase above those established in 1434C. The second change is calling out subsection C in 23 VSA section 1434. So the notwithstanding is now very specific to subsection C. This is just an express call out. The only cost benefit here is that usually it was drafted to reference 1434 generally and then had more specific language afterwards, so that if 1434 ever changes in the future, I don't have to remember 10 years from now that the Linden Charter has a reference to subsection C, which has changed to subsection I to Romanet 4. But I promise you I will try to remember in the event that happens. The final difference is, as the representative pointed out on line 10, Representative Shaw's amendment adds a condition precedent to the adoption and enforcement of the ordinance. before this ordinance can be enforced for the increased penalties, the town has to ensure that the covered bridge has a limit set in accordance with 23 VSA section 1397A. That's both the adoption of the limit and the posting of that limit on the bridge according to general law requirements. So this, as the chair put it, requires that those are in place before the enforcement of this ordinance.
Questions, yeah, Representative Higley, go ahead.
So, but my understanding, though, even if this is kind of belt and suspenders in a sense, because prior to this, they still would have had to follow general law.
That is correct. And that's just how charters interact with the general law. They only control where they're more specific. The language that left this committee was more specific only in that it allowed increased penalties. General law would have still required for the posting of the bridge and for setting limits in accordance with 1397A. This now directly incorporates this as a condition of enforcing the ordinance.
I just wonder about like enforcement or documentation, like, does that put an overly hard burden on the town to prove that they had posted it? Like if the sign comes down after someone hits it or something? Or is that the normal, like, way that that's set up?
It likely they would have to prove these things in order to enforce it's under general law anyway.
Okay.
Representative Burke.
A little off topic.
Okay. Define rule.
During the presentation, I think somebody from the town mentioned that they were going to take a measure to try to ensure that bridge was not damaged. And then subsequent to that, somebody else said something about it where they're thinking of putting up a steel.
Can opener.
Can opener.
Yeah,
That's probably a bad idea, but I don't think it's relevant in this particular.
I am concerned about that idea, but I don't think it's relevant to this particular thing.
The chair has I can't comment on the Home Alone plan the town is putting in place. House Ways and Means did discuss similar things that have been put in place in other communities, such as hanging paint cans from the bridge so that trucks that hit the bridge would be smeared with paint and identify runaway culprits. So that's, again, Home Alone schemes.
Shift in liabilities.
So given our tight timeline here, does anybody have any questions before we take a position on Representative Shaw's amendment that are specific to this conditioning of the higher penalty?
Right.
Just trying to bring it in. I share the concern of Representative Hooper, but Representative
I agree with this. Got covered bridge in Dummerston. It keeps getting smacked. Maybe this will help.
yeah, and to be clear, this act provision, if we find this amendment friendly, will only apply in the Linden Charter. But if another community, if we sort of say we're going to open that up under these narrow conditions, I think our initial work, just to bring it back out on this section, was we looked at, there was a blanket in H490 as it was introduced, any ordinance going up to 10,000. They said, well, we only really need it for this covered bridge issue. And so we narrowed it. And then Representative Shaw's amendment will further condition it on the proper posting and warning. So I think Representative Shaw's going just a little bit of a notch further than we did.
So to speak.
So I would entertain
I'll
that.
make a motion, we approve the amendment from Representative Shaw, dated 5/2/23, draft number 1.1, 3:09 p.m.
So Representative Higley has made a motion that we find Representative Shaw's amendment favorable. Any other discussion? Clerk shall commence to call the roll.
Representative Barron?
Yes.
Representative Boylan, yes. Representative Mingo?
Yes.
Representative Morgan?
Yes.
Representative Hooper Brownson?
Yes.
Representative Murphy?
Yes.
Representative Chase?
Yes.
Representative Waters Evans?
Yes.
Representative Hooper Randolph? Representative Nugent?
Yes.
Representative Higley?
Yes.
Representative McCarthy?
Yes.
11-0-1.
Great. Well, that is it for our work this morning. We will adjourn, go